Chapter 1. Arrogance and the Palm of Destiny. Paris. 1:15 p.m. The warm lights of the Lune Rouge restaurant danced on the faces of the hurried customers, mixing the aroma of red wine with the discreet sound of the violin in the corner of the room. The restaurant was one of the most sought after in the Marais district, not for the refinement of the dishes, but for the fear and fascination that surrounded his employer, Charles Delacroix. Just 31 years old, Charles was known as a brutal, unempathetic thug with a colossal ego. Raised in wealth, he had made his fortune through blackmail, gambling, and shady dealings. No one challenged his authority, not even the restaurant's waiters, who trembled at his every move. That day, Charles had just lit a Cuban cigar, looking down on the crowded room, when his gaze fell on a young woman. She sat alone at a table in the corner, dressed in a simple blue dress, her hair loosely tied back, and her eyes lost in a disturbing silence. Her name was Jade. She was 26 years old, and a sadness hidden behind the calm smile she wore like a mask. Without any hesitation, Charles stood up and approached her table. The people around her silent, as if they had been warned of something dangerous. "Get up," he said to her, in a low but sharp voice. Jade looked up. She didn't seem scared, just surprised. "You're gorgeous. You deserve something. Just right." From the pocket of his expensive coat, Charles took out a thick wad of money. Without hesitation, he slipped it into her cleavage, between the folds of her dress, under the shocked gazes of the other customers. "Come with me. Now I want you." A moment of sharp silence fell between them. Then, with an almost regal dignity, Jade stood up. Not to follow him, but to look him straight in the eye. "You're a bastard," she said calmly but firmly, man sick with power and empty inside. And without blinking, she gave him a painful slap on the cheek. The restaurant froze. Charles, stunned by the gesture that had humiliated him, felt an explosion of anger and shouted, "Out! Now!" Jade walked out of the restaurant with dignified steps, but she had barely passed the door when her knees gave way and she collapsed on the sidewalk. A passerby shouted for help, and Charles, who was watching everything from the window, felt an inexplicable knot in his stomach. Without saying anything, he rushed outside and called an ambulance. Time seemed to be dilating, as in a heavy, indefinite dream. Charles stood motionless, his hand clenched on the phone, while the cold voice on the other end asked him for the address. He didn't remember clearly how he had dialed the number, he didn't remember what he had said. But beyond the thick glass of the restaurant, Jade lay inert on the sidewalk, and the people had gathered around her like diffuse, faceless shadows. He was looking at her somehow lost, with an uneasiness he couldn't name. It wasn't pity, it wasn't guilt. Maybe it was feared, or maybe a primitive form of consciousness that was finally beginning to awaken in him. In his eyes, her figure was no longer provocative, no longer a shiny toy he wanted to buy. Now she seemed fragile. She had filled the air with dignity a few moments ago, and now she lay broken, with her hair disheveled and her dress crumpled, caught between the gray lines of the asphalt. Charles bit his lips, tasting the metallic taste of his own helplessness. He was angry with himself, but he didn't know exactly why. Because he had spoken to her like that? Because he had seen her collapse and not caught her? Or because, for a split second, he had been afraid that he might lose her, even though he had never had her? When the ambulance arrived, the blue lights reflected in his irises like a condemnation. And for the first time in a long time, Charles felt everything he knew about himself begin to waver. "I want to go with her," he said firmly as the doctors lifted her onto the stretcher. "Only if you're family." "I'm her boyfriend." In the ambulance, Jade was unconscious. Charles looked at her with an anxiety he had never felt before. There was something about that woman that shook him. When they arrived at the hospital, a doctor asked him to wait. After almost an hour, the same doctor came out with a serious look. "Do you have any close relatives?" "No." "What does she have?" "Cancer. In an advanced stage. She's a fighter, but she needs urgent treatment and, above all, support." Charles was stuck. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say or what to do. The woman he had tried to buy like a toy was now the purest and most real lesson life had ever given him. In a Paris where everything seemed for sale, he had just found something that couldn't be bought, a true soul. "I'll take care of her," Charles whispered, looking through the window of the door, where Jade slept, pale and fragile. But he didn't know that what followed between them was not just a path of forgiveness, but a love story that would transform him from an underworld figure into a manned, living man. Chapter 2. Waking Up. The diffuse morning light filtered through the hospital ward blinds, drawing warm stripes on the white sheet. The monitors flickered discreetly, and the rhythmic sound of the heart seemed to breathe with the silence in the room. Jade opened her eyes slowly, as if she had come back from a heavy dream. She immediately felt the pain in her chest, then the harsh cold of reality. It took her a few seconds to remember. The restaurant. The money. The palm. The fall. Then, "Where am I?" she whispered. "You're in the hospital. Paris, 10th arrondissement. You fainted." The voice came from somewhere to the left. Jade turned her head slowly and saw him. He was sitting on a small chair, bent under the weight of his strong body. The expensive suit seemed out of place in that sterile room. His eyes were red from sleeplessness. But he didn't seem arrogant, he seemed human. "You? What are you doing here?" she asked in a low voice, more surprised than angry. Charles avoided her gaze for a moment. He cleared his throat. "I was there. When you fell, I came with you in the ambulance. I don't know why. But I couldn't leave. Do you feel guilty?" "Maybe. Maybe yes. Or maybe. It's more than that. You don't owe me anything, Charles. And I don't owe you anything. You can go." He closed his eyes for a moment. It was hard for him to see her so weak and yet so strong. There was a silent force in her that made him feel like a child who had punched a flower. "The doctors told me about the disease," he murmured. Jade froze. She turned her face to the ceiling to hide the tears that were already gathering. "I don't like being looked at with pity," she said tightly. "I don't look at you with pity, Jade. I look at you with shame. Because I treated you like an object. But today, when I saw how you fell, I felt something break inside me. A conscience. Possibly, or maybe a soul I didn't even know I had." The silence between them grew thick. All that could be heard was the sound of the Ford drip slowly. "I don't understand why you stayed," she said more gently. "You don't know me. I don't owe you anything. I'm no one's trophy. I don't want anything from you, Jade. I just want to be here, if you let me." She looked at him for a long time, searching his face. He wasn't the same man anymore. The arrogant boss had disappeared, leaving in his place a vulnerable man, with red eyes and trembling palms. "Okay," she said softly. "You can stay. But don't try to buy me. I don't need your money. I don't want your pity. I won't offer you any of that. I'll only offer you my presence, as long as you let me." Then, "Wait." But in silence. "I don't want to talk about cancer. Not today." Charles smiled almost imperceptibly and sat better in his chair. Then, without a word, he took out his expensive watch and put it in his pocket. It was the first sign that he was leaving his world outside, beyond the door of the ward. And in that fragile silence, in the cold hospital, a strange story opened its first page. .1 in which death and love held hands, and an undercover officer learned, slowly, what it means to love a man who doesn't belong to you. After an hour of silence in which Jay didn't say a word, the door of the ward opened slightly. A young nurse, with gentle eyes and quiet steps, entered holding a small syringe and a painkiller. "Hello, sir." "Charles," he answered dryly, without taking his gaze off Jade's pale face. "Mr. Charles, we'll give her something to help her sleep. She's very exhausted." Charles just nodded. Within seconds, Jade felt the fine sting in her arm, blinked once at Charles, and fell asleep, calm, with a fragile expression of peace on her face. "Would you like to come with me to the doctor's?" the nurse asked, as she gathered up the kit. "Yes," Charles answered almost automatically. He followed her down the coldly lit hallways, with heavy steps, as if he were walking to a sentencing. It was the first time in his life that he felt he had no control. Neither money nor threats, nor his power meant anything in front of that word. Cancer. They arrived in front of an office. The sign on the door read Dr. Martin Lefebvre, Oncology. The nurse knocked discreetly and opened the door. "Doctor, this is Mr. Charles, regarding patient Jade Renaud." The doctor was an elderly man with a calm, tired expression. He stood up from his chair and nodded to Charles, inviting him to sit down. "I understand that you are close to the patient?" "I am someone who wants to help her," Charles said, not knowing exactly how he felt either. "Then you must be prepared to hear the truth. Because I don't have good news." Charles clenched his fists in his lap. "Tell me everything." Dr. Lefebvre took off his glasses, wiped them with a handkerchief and sighed deeply. "Jade has cervical cancer. Stage 4, the disease has spread. It has metastasized. She ignored the symptoms for a long time, more likely she knew, but she no longer had the resources to fight. "Is it terminal?" asked Charles, feeling a lump in his throat. "I don't want to give you false hope. Medicine is not magic. But I can't say that all is lost either. The chances are small, 0.5%, statistically speaking. 5%. The words fell like a guillotine into Charles's soul. 0.5%. He had been through shootings, betrayals, prison, but he had never felt so much fear. What does this mean in concrete terms? What can be done? "We're starting chemotherapy. She's aggressive. She'll suffer a lot. But it's the only option. If she reacts well in the first month, we can talk about a ray of hope. But it's a fight. And a hard one." Charles stood up slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. "I want the best. Hospitals, treatments, doctors abroad. I don't care how much it costs. She deserves the best." Dr. Lefebvre looked at him carefully for the first time. There was something painful and sincere in that man's eyes, a desperate desire to fix what couldn't be fixed. "Money can buy a lot, Mr. Charles. But here, support and patience will matter more. Don't run away when it starts to hurt. Not for her, not for you." "I'm not going to run away. I've never felt anything like this before. It's like everything I've done so far is worthless if she doesn't stay." The doctor nodded and led him to the door. "Then start by being there. Not as a savior, but as a human being." Charles walked out of the office, his steps heavy with truth. This wasn't just a fight against a disease. It was about the fight of his life. For the first time, in the heart of a man raised in darkness, a light sprouted. And that light had a name: Jade. The days passed like a dream in the living room with white curtains and cold walls. For Charles, time had lost its shape. He no longer knew what day it was, nor what was happening outside in the Paris he had once controlled with a single glance. Now, the only universe that mattered was around the bed where Jade fought for every breath. He had not left her side for even an hour. He slept on a folding chair, his head resting on the windowsill, his eyes always on her. He had begun to understand the nuances of pain. The long silences, the suppressed groans, the fingers clenched in the sheets, and, above all, that heartbreaking courage of a woman who sometimes smiled just to reassure him. The day after the first chemotherapy session, Jade's body seemed a thin shell that barely held life inside. When the nurse removed her, Jade began to tremble. Then suddenly, she stood up abruptly and ran to the bathroom, Charles after her. She vomited so violently that it seemed she was detaching herself from her own body. "Jade! Jade!" he shouted, holding her hair and supporting her in his arms, his voice broken by panic. She collapsed onto the cold tiles, sweating, tears mixed with blood at the corner of her mouth. She was breathing hard, as if every breath was a fight. I can't, Charles. It's too much," she whispered, her eyes closed. "No, Jade. Don't give up. Not today. Not now. Listen to me. You can't. So much pain. I don't feel anything anymore. Only darkness. Then fight for the light," he shouted, his voice trembling. He carefully lifted her up and put her on the bed. The doctors intervened, administering sedatives. For several hours, Jade was between life and death. Charles stood at her head with his hands folded and tears flowing shamelessly. At midnight, Jade opened her eyes. She was weak, but alive. "Charles, why are you still here?" "Because I can't be anywhere else. Because I don't want to. Do you realize I might die?" "I know, but not today. Not while we still have a chance." Jade looked at him long. Another woman would have been grateful. But she was Jade. And Jade was the truth. "Even if you could pay to buy me a new heart, Charles, my life can't be bought. But maybe it can be saved." "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, hard but determined. "I want to fight. But not here. Not just with pills and vomiting and cold beds. I read about a clinic. Somewhere in Switzerland, place where they don't just treat the disease, but the person. Where healing means more than chemotherapy. Where there's hope. Tell me your name. We're leaving tomorrow. We'll charter a plane. Whatever you want, Jade. I don't want private planes, Charles. I don't want to run away. I just want to go. Together. Not like a gangster and a sick woman. But like two people who believe life still has something to offer. You have my word. We're going. And if you have a 5% chance, I'll double it just by being there with you. Don't promise things you can't control, she said with a weak smile. I only promise what I can, that I won't leave you alone. For the first time, Jade reached out her hand to him. Charles took it gently, like a flower that could break at the slightest touch. And in that palm, he felt a different kind of strength. It wasn't the strength of a strong man, it was the strength of a living man. In the long, silent hallway of the hospital, Charles walked heavily, phone in hand. He was trembling, but not from the cold, but from something he had never known: shame. Before Jade, shame was just a word, a tool for controlling others. Now he felt it in his flesh. He stopped in a quiet corner, next to a coffee machine, and dialed the number. He hadn't called there in 7 years. He knew that maybe she wouldn't even answer. But he had to try. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a voice, feminine, cold, sharp, she replied. What do you want, Charles? Margot, please, don't hang up. You had 7 years to say, please, to me. Now do you remember that you have a sister? Margot, I know what you think of me. And you're right, I was a scoundrel, a swindler. I put money and power before everything. And I lost you. But now it's different. Different. Let me guess. Do you need something? A deal to clean up? A lie to cover up? No. Margot, I love someone. A long silence fell on the other end of the line. Then, a bitter chuckle. Love. You. Charles Delacroix? You've never loved anyone. Not even yourself. That's right. But now I've met someone. She's not like all the women in my bars, in my dirty games. She's real. Clean. And she fades away in front of me. What's wrong with her? Cancer. Stage 4. I need you. Not with money. With your soul. With your reason. With your heart that I betrayed, but which I know still beats for those you believe in. And why would I come? Because it's the first time in my life that I need to be human. And I don't know how. But you know. You have always been the man who had the courage to feel. You left my dirty world precisely so that you wouldn't get lost. Margot, help me save her, or at least, to be her support. I ask for your help not as a brother, but as a man who is learning what love is from a woman he could lose. Again, quiet. Charles felt his heart beating in his throat, waiting for a sentence. Tell me where she is, Margot answered, with a changed voice, softer, but still loaded with reservations. St. Louis Hospital, room 314. Her name is Jade. I'll be there in 2 hours. Margot, thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not coming for you. I'm coming for a woman who probably deserves to be loved. We'll see if you deserve it. 2 hours later, an elegant, tall woman with a sober air appeared in the doorway of the salon. Her hair was tied in a simple bun and she carried a leather bag in her hand. In her eyes was the same harsh intelligence that Charles had avoided all his life, but also a trace of unconfined pain. Jade, weakened, raised her head slightly from the pillow. Hi, I'm Margot. His sister. I'm sorry we met like this. But I think you've achieved what no one has achieved before. What exactly? Jade whispered. Bring him back from hell. Charles, standing by the bed, remained silent. His eyes moistened. No drama, no arrogance. Just a sincere tear, and Margot, for the first time in years, looked at him not with contempt, but with painful curiosity. Maybe it's not too late yet. For any of us. Chapter 3. A Ray of Hope. The sun was shining through the large window of Dr. Lefebvre's office, casting a warm light into the cold corners of the room. Charles sat on a wooden chair, a little too small for his massive frame, and Margot accompanied him, silent, with her arms crossed and a serious face. In front of them, the doctor placed his files and adjusted his glasses. Good morning, Mr. Delacroix. Ms. Margot, I'm glad you're here. What can you do for Jade? Charles asked directly, his voice low but tense. Unfortunately, I already told you. The progression of the disease is advanced. I started the treatment, but the chemotherapy is hard to bear, and the prognosis remains reserved. Jade is strong, but not enough, Margot completed, calmly. We know, so we are here for the other option. The doctor sighed and stood up, taking a plain white envelope from a file. He placed it on the table and pushed it towards Charles. I talked to a colleague of mine in Switzerland. He's the medical director of a clinic specializing in integrative oncological therapies. It is not a place where miraculous cures are promised, but there they treat the person, not just the disease. It is called the Vidalus Clinic, in Montreux. Charles took the envelope and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a carefully handwritten sheet of paper. Dr. Emil Ruth, specialist in immunotherapy and integrative therapies, he works with patients in terminal stages, but with physical and emotional resources to fight. Jade still has these resources. It is important to act quickly. I spoke to him personally. He will receive it. How much time do we have? Asked Margot. Ideally, he should be there in a week at most. The therapy will be personalized, depending on Jade's biological response. They will start with a combination of immunotherapy, oncological nutrition, psychotherapy, even scientifically validated alternative methods, hypothermia, oxygen therapy. Charles was reading silently. Vide Clinic, Chemin de Bellevue 18, Montreux, Switzerland. Telephone, +41 215553400. Direct contact, Dr. Emil Ruth, emil.ruth@videluce.ch. I have money, Mr. Doctor, an unlimited amount, if necessary. It doesn't matter how much it costs. Charles, it's not about money, it's about presence. Patience, it's a clinic where the family plays an active role. You'll have to be there to learn, to live with her every step. Every day. I'll be there. Every moment, Charles said with a determination that would have scared him a month ago. Then prepare the transfer. I've already spoken to our hospital. We can release the documents tomorrow. Jade can leave in 2 or 3 days, depending on her physical condition. Thank you, Doctor, Margot said, standing up. Then she looked at her brother and added in a slightly gentle voice. It seems you have a mission. Not as an undercover officer, but as a human being. Charles squeezed the paper in his hands. It wasn't just an address. He was perhaps the only open door between life and death. And he was ready, for the first time, to pass through it not alone, but with her. With Jade. The spring wind blew slowly through the leaves of the trees in the hospital courtyard. Jade looked out the window of the ward with tired but serene eyes. She still couldn't get out of bed on her own, but her gentle smile betrayed a new peace. It wasn't a resigned peace, but a courageous one, that of a man who, in the face of death, chooses to live. Charles stood on the edge of the bed, holding her hand carefully, as if he were holding a dove's wing. Have you read anything about the clinic? She asked, staring blankly. Everything you could read. Margot called there this morning. She's expecting us. Dr. Ruth has scheduled a full consultation for us on the first day. They asked me to tell you that we'll be treated not as patients, but as people. People. What a simple word and how hard to live with. I've only just learned what it means, Jade, Charles said in a low voice. All my life I've been something else. But you've stripped me of all the layers. Charles, you don't have to change for me. No, not for you. For me. But because of you. The door to the office opened slowly. Margot entered, wearing a simple jacket and a folder under her arm. She smiled warmly but firmly. The documents are ready. The private plane is waiting for us tomorrow morning at 8. Insurance, translations, analyses, everything is in order. Are you ready? Jade blinked, almost stunned. It was as if everything was happening too fast. Yesterday she was vomiting blood. Today she was going to fly to Switzerland. But somewhere, deep inside her, she felt a glimmer of hope that refused to die. I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I can't stay here anymore. I want to try. Even if it hurts. Margot approached and, for the first time, touched her shoulder delicately. You won't be alone. Charles nodded, but fell silent. He wanted to say so much, and yet he felt that any word would break that meaningful silence. The next morning, a special ambulance was waiting at the hospital entrance. Jade had been carefully prepared by the nurses. Wearing a simple white dress and a thin scarf around her neck, she climbed onto the stretcher with Charles's support as the plane lifted off the ground. Jade looked up at the clouds and murmured, Maybe we're not running from death. Maybe we're just running towards another form of life. Charles took her hand and, for the first time, he kissed her cheek without haste. There, in the small cabin of the plane, between heaven and earth, there was nothing but the two of them. And an unknown road to a clinic in Switzerland, where maybe, just maybe, love would give a new shape to life. Montreux greeted them with an unnatural silence. The city seemed like a painting. Lake Leman shone under the gentle morning light, the Alps watched over the horizon, and the air was clean, almost medicinal. Jade, weakened but conscious, watched everything from the ambulance that transported her from the airport to the Vide Luce clinic. It's so Quiet, she whispered. A healing silence, Charles replied, holding her hand while hiding his emotion under a mask of calm that he wore less and less often lately. The clinic was located on a hill, surrounded by Japanese gardens, silver pines and rare flowers. Everything seemed designed to soothe not only the body, but also the soul. Tea didn't smell like a hospital, tea smelled of peace. Team dressed in simple white awaited her in the main hall. No stiff gowns, no clipboards held like shields, and in their midst, an elderly man with calm green eyes and white hair tied in a discreet bun at the back of his neck. Dr. Emile Ruth. Miss Jade. Mr. Delacroix. Welcome. I don't promise miracles. But I promise that here we will fight together, with everything medicine and humanity can offer. His voice was warm, with a slight German accent, and the way he looked at Jade was deeply human, without false compassion, without fear, without haste. How much time do I have? Jade asked, looking directly into the doctor's eyes. As long as we choose to live. Every day, I won't lie to you. Stage 4 is the last threshold. But there are patients who have lived for years. And above all, they lived. They didn't just survive. What treatment do you propose? Asked Margot, who was standing further back, holding a folder. We will start with adaptive immunotherapy, based on the genetic profile of the tumor. We will use hyperbaric oxygen therapy, personalized oncological diet, and daily psychotherapy. Here, healing is not just about the body, it is also about the soul. Charles took a step forward. Tell us what we need to do. I want to be involved. Learn, be there for her. Doctor. Ruth looked at him for a long time, with a slightly raised eyebrow. First of all, Mr. Delacroix, learn to listen. Not just to what Jade says, but also when she is silent. The rest comes by itself. Hours of tests, analyses, discussions followed. Jade was admitted to a room overlooking the lake, with ambient music, poetry books and fresh flowers. That evening, Charles stayed by her bed, saying nothing. He just watched her fall asleep. Before closing his eyes, Jade whispered, I don't know what tomorrow will bring me. But for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. Charles kissed her forehead and replied, and if tomorrow doesn't come, I'll bring you a new one until there is no more death. Only love. There, in that quiet corner of the world, it didn't matter how much longer she had to live. It only mattered how it was a cool afternoon, and the wind blew gently through the street's old buildings of Montreux and a quiet neighborhood. At the end of a cobblestone alley stood a small Catholic church, built of white stone, with pale stained glass windows and a heavy carved oak door. Margot and Charles walked slowly, side by side, without saying a word. For Charles, it was the first time in his 31 years the church had been just a strange building, which he passed by without looking. Now, it was something more, a place where perhaps something, could understand what he could not say. Inside, it was quiet. Only the diffused light of the stained glass windows colored the floor in tones of blue, red and gold. An old priest, with a serene and gentle face, looked up from a book and, seeing them, approached. Hello, Margot said in a low voice. We would like, just to stay a while. Welcome, the priest replied. Here you don't ask for anything. Here you just breathe and forgive. Charles took a few steps forward, looking at the altar, then suddenly turned to the priest. Father, I don't know how to pray. I've never believed. I was a bad man. Very bad. But now, I don't ask for myself. She's a woman. Dying. And I feel like there's nothing I can do. The priest looked at him with unwavering gentleness, then put a hand on his shoulder. Praying doesn't mean knowing the words. It means admitting that you don't have them anymore. God doesn't ask for poetry. He asks for truth. Margot, with moist eyes, squeezed Charles's arm. Father. Jade is seriously ill. But since she came into his life, my brother has changed. We're not asking for miracles. Just strength. Then you will receive it. I will light a candle for Jade. And one for you so that your soul does not fall asleep in the darkness. Why now, Father? Why in the worst hour do I feel that for the first time I am truly living? Charles asked, almost whispering. Because sometimes, only falling teaches us to look up. Charles sat down on his knees, clumsily, like a child who does not know what he is doing. Margot, next to him, closed her eyes, and that centuries-old silence, in the stone house that seemed detached from another world, tears did not seem like weakness, but a prayer. After a few minutes, Charles stood up, and in a hoarse voice he said, "Father, if she dies, I don't want to go back to who I was." "Then you won't. But remember, son, even if it dies, the love you learned doesn't die, will keep you alive. Forever." Charles bowed his head slightly. It wasn't salvation, it was a beginning. They left the church without saying anything. Only with quieter steps, and a more peaceful heart. That evening, Jade would open her eyes from a heavy sleep and see Charles by the bed, smiling at her differently than she had ever done before. Not with the arrogance of a confident man, but with the calmness of a man who had finally learned to bow his head, and to love without fear. The days at the Vida-Luz clinic flowed differently. Time was no longer measured in hours, but in moments of suffering and brief moments of peace. The treatment was harsh. Jade felt the effects of immunotherapy in every fiber of her being. Body, terrible fatigue, chills, pains that seemed to tear her bones, but she didn't give up. She never said, "Enough." She just gritted her teeth and kept going. Charles was always there. He helped her walk to the window, read her passages from books, held her hand when she vomited, moistened her lips when she could no longer speak. Margot, although reserved, had become an invisible pillar. She took care of the organization, talked to the doctors, and above all, made sure that Jade didn't feel alone even for a moment. On an afternoon when the lake seemed glassy and the mountains were covered in a thin mist, Jade sat propped up on pillows, her head bare of hair, but her eyes clear. Charles held her hand in his, like a ritual. "Do you remember our first meeting?" she asked, smiling weakly. "How could I forget her? You were the only person who said no to my face. And with a slap. If I knew who you were, maybe I wouldn't have been so brave." She laughed softly, then coughed, clutching her chest. Charles gently wiped her lips and spoke to her slowly. "If you knew who I was, maybe you would never have looked me in the eye. But look where we are now. I look at you and I don't see the sick woman anymore. I see the beginning of me." Jade closed her eyes for a few seconds. When she opened them again, they were wet. "Charles, if I don't get over this, promise me you won't set the world on fire again. That you won't become who you were." "No," he murmured, "I can't promise that. I can only promise you that if you're not here anymore, I won't stop carrying you with me. And that I'll build something, I won't destroy it." She put her hand to his cheek. "Then live. Even if I can't." In the evening, after a torturous day of therapy, Dr. Ruth came with the results of the first tests. He called Charles to a corner of the room. "It's early, but it's an answer. Her immune system seems to be reacting. The tumor hasn't grown. Maybe it's even stagnated. So is there a chance? I don't want to give you false hope. But yes, it's a ray. Small, but real. It matters a lot that she's not fighting alone. It matters that she loves. And she's loved." Charles felt his chest tighten. He wanted to scream, cry. But he didn't. He just closed his eyes and thanked her in his mind, or maybe, for the first time, thanking a force greater than himself. That night, Jade slept deeply, and Charles, lying in a small armchair next to her bed, dreamed for the first time since he was a child. He dreamed that she was walking along the edge of the lake, in a white dress, with long, healthy hair, and he was silently following her, a few steps away. And as she turned to him, she told him, "Don't be afraid. It doesn't matter how long we lived. It matters how much we love." In the morning he woke up in tears. But for the first time, they weren't tears of fear. Chapter 4. The Unexpected Change. It was a cold morning, but the sun had managed to break through heavy clouds, bringing a gentle light to the city of Montreux. Charles woke up early, feeling more tired than ever. The days had passed slowly, and Jade's treatments had left their mark on everyone around him. That morning, however, something was weighing on Charles more than usual. For some time, he had felt the need to talk to someone about what he was going through. He was walking down the cobblestone road that led to the small church that he had discovered with Margot a few days before. He had entered there for the first time with a heart full of doubts and the fear of the unknown. Today, however, he was walking with the thought that he might find answers to the questions that had been tormenting him for a long time. The church was almost empty. The warmth of the candles and the profound silence gave him a feeling of peace. The priest, the same old man with gentle eyes, stood by the altar, reading quietly. Charles approached, and the priest saw him and motioned for him to come. "Good morning, son. What brings you to the house of the Lord today?" Charles sat down on a bench next to the priest, but said nothing, to remain silent for a few moments, feeling overwhelmed by the pain that enveloped him. Finally, with a trembling voice, he opened his soul. "Father, I don't know if I can take it anymore. Jade has fought so hard and the treatments, but I don't know if I will lose her. How can I know if God wants to save her? How can I know if I have done enough for her?" The priest leaned a little towards him, with a warm look. "God does nothing by chance, and your love is all she needs to be healed. I know it's not easy, but you have to understand, son, that it's not just about saving her physically. If you truly love Jade, God will do the miracle. Maybe not in the way you expect, but it will be what's best for both of you." Charles looked at him with tearful eyes, feeling the priest's words penetrate deep into his heart. "How can I pray for her, Father? I've never been a religious man. I don't know what to say." The priest smiled slightly, with a gentle and wise expression. "Prayer doesn't have to be complicated. The easiest way to connect with God is to say what you feel. All you have to do is talk to him. And if you don't know what to say, then learn the words that the Lord has left for us. You can start with the Our Father." Charles closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. The priest began to recite, in a warm and soothing voice. "Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." Charles listened attentively, and in his mind the words were settling, like the foundation stones of a new building. When the priest finished, Charles tried to repeat them, with a trembling voice. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The words had begun to come out of his mouth, feeling for the first time that they were more than simple words. They were a cry from a deep place in his soul. "Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done." Between each word, he felt an immense burden lift from his shoulders. The priest looked at him carefully, letting him continue. "On earth, as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." Charles stopped in tears. He did not know whether it was a complete prayer or a simple cry. But he felt that, for the first time in his life, he had prayed with all his heart. The priest looked at him with compassion and put a hand on his shoulder. "That's all it takes, son. Prayer is not measured in words, it's measured in intention. God heard every word you said and will answer you." Charles felt a deep peace envelop him. The tears hadn't stopped, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of release. He felt that, in that moment, he was no longer alone. And maybe God wouldn't answer right away. But he wasn't the same man anymore. The love he had for Jade, his sincere prayer, were all that mattered now. He stood up slowly and thanked the priest. With a faint smile. "Thank you, Father. Thank you for teaching me to pray. I know now that I can't do anything alone. But I will do what I can for Jade. And I will hope for her. And for you, son," the priest added, looking at him gently. "Don't forget, God works through love. In your love for Jade lies the answer." Charles left the church with a new sense of peace. The road may not be easy, but for the first time he felt that he was no longer alone in his struggle. And deep in his soul, he knew that, God willing, their love would face any test. Time passed slowly, with days of pain and hope mixed together. Jade continued her difficult treatments, and Charles never left her alone. Even in moments of extreme weakness, when the pain seemed to overwhelm her, he was there, next to her, with a hand on her forehead, with a gentle word that encouraged her. Although the treatments had worn her down, making her feel like her body was fighting an invisible enemy, Jade did not give up. Despite her fatigue and frailty, on a late fall evening, when the sky seemed to be crying with her, something miraculous was happening. After a chemotherapy session, Jade woke up in a hospital bed with a sense of relief she had not felt in months. That morning, after the doctors had confirmed minor but significant improvements, Jade and Charles went out onto the hospital terrace. Jade looked up at the sky, thinking about all the times she had felt lost, when she felt like she was going to give in. But for the first time, on that clear morning, something seemed to be happening deep inside her. Maybe there's still a chance," Jade whispered, her eyes moist, but with a shy smile on her lips. Charles looked at her with eyes full of hope, but also with a deep anxiety. He didn't know what to believe. He lived every day with the fear that every moment could be his last, but a deep love for the woman in front of him pushed him to believe that everything would be fine. That, one way or another, they would overcome this nightmare. "You know, Jade, I prayed for you. I learned the Our Father prayer, as the priest told me. I was never religious. But now, I know that I only have love and faith as weapons. If God wants to save you, he will find a way. Jade looked into his eyes, surprised, but also impressed by the sincerity in his voice. Charles, do you really believe that God could save me? That in all this pain, there is a way out? Charles leaned towards her, taking her hand carefully. If you can fight, Jade, if you can stay strong, then anything is possible. I know I was not the man who had the right to ever pray, but for you, for us, I will continue to believe. That moment, a doctor entered the room, a smile on his face, and Jade looked up, suddenly feeling uneasy. Jade, we have good news. Your tests are much better than we expected. The tumor has significantly reduced in size. Continue treatment, but it seems that the treatments and your immunity are starting to react positively. We have reason to be optimistic. Jade swallowed hard, feeling a wave of relief sweep over her weakened body. Charles, seeing her calmer for the first time in months, squeezed her hand tightly. See, I asked for his help and I was given a chance. Jade looked into his eyes, a faint smile, but her eyes were full of gratitude. She had always been a strong woman, but she felt that, in a way, she was now at the beginning of a new path. Maybe everything has a meaning, even this pain. Maybe you have to go through the darkness to reach the light, Jade whispered. Maybe we're only just beginning to truly live. Charles kissed her forehead with a smile. Just as God had given them this chance, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Nothing would ever separate them, no matter how hard it was, no matter how much pain they had ahead of them. They knew now that they had something they were not willing to part with: love. And even though their path would never be easy, that day, for the first time, they had hope that life could offer them something more than suffering, a new beginning. Deep night fell over Montreux, and Charles found himself in a place he didn't recognize. It was a bright forest, with bright green trees, and the air was heavy to bear, but not because of a smell. Unpleasant, but because it seemed charged with an inexplicable energy. Walking through that forest, a feeling of unease gripped him, as if someone was following him, and soon, he felt a presence. A blinding light, like a beacon in the middle of a dark night, emerged from the darkness, and in the middle of that light a gentle but powerful figure appeared. An angel. The angel's face had no clear features, but his eyes were full of compassion, and his smile seemed to heal all evil. Charles, the angel said to him in a warm and calm voice, but with an authority impossible to ignore. Your life has never been what you thought it was. You have closed yourself off in your dark world, thinking you have everything, but you have nothing. Love is the true wealth, not money, not power. If you want Jade to live, you must choose. Leave your old life behind. Charles swallowed hard, looking at the angel. I don't understand. What do you mean? Jade, if I give up, will she live? The angel approached him, and although he didn't touch him, an overwhelming sense of calm penetrated him. Yes, Charles, if you abandon your old life, if you change your heart and your path, then your love will win. But if you don't give up the darkness, you won't be able to save it. You have to choose. The light had begun to fade, and the angel disappeared almost in an instant, leaving Charles alone in the middle of the forest. And before he could say anything, the dream had faded, and Charles woke up suddenly, his soul heavy and his eyes full of tears. He felt dizzy and confused, but something deep in his heart knew that the dream had not been a simple illusion. It was assigned, a calling. He had to make a change. Dawn broke upon his hotel room, and Charles suddenly rose from his bed, his thoughts troubled and his heart heavy. He began to pace the room, and the vision of the angel would not leave him alone. His thoughts were piling up, but he felt a strong urge to talk to someone. Someone who knew him, who knew his past, and who would not judge him. Margot. Sitting down at the phone, he called his sister. His voice trembled when she answered. Charles, what happened? What's wrong with you at this hour? Margot, I had a dream. I had a strange dream. I don't know if I can understand it. But, I swear it was real. Margot was silent for a few seconds. She probably realized that her brother wouldn't have said anything like that without a good reason. Tell me, Charles, what happened in your dream? Charles swallowed hard, not knowing exactly how to express what he felt. He began to tell her, his voice trembling and his eyes filled with tears. He was an angel, Margot. He called me to a bright forest, and he told me that I had to give up everything I was, everything I had done in my life as an underworld. That if I wanted Jade to live, I had to give up my darkness, my past life, this miserable money and my power. He told me that if I chose to be someone else, if I chose to change, then my love would face everything, and Jade would live. Charles held his breath, feeling a huge hole in his chest. Margot, I have to give up everything. For her, I have no other choice, right? Margot listened in silence, and Charles's words sank deep into her soul. It was clear that her brother had reached a turning point. He was a changed man, but change was a difficult and painful path. Charles, if this is what you feel, if you really feel that you have to do this, then I think you have to follow your heart. I don't know how you will do it, but if you want to change everything, start now. You have your whole life before you can fix what you have destroyed. Maybe, in your own way, right now you have begun to be the man you wanted to be. Charles sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling a sense of relief in his soul, but also an immense fear. It was clear that it would not be easy, but deep down he knew that if he wanted Jade to live, he could not continue on the same path. He was choosing change. He was choosing love. Thank you, Margot. I know you never trusted me, but I promise I will do my best. For Jade. And for me. Margot felt a tear fall down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Her brother had finally found his way. Maybe it wasn't too late. I will support you, Charles. You can't do it all alone, but, if you want to change, you will. That night, Charles fell asleep with a lighter heart. The dream wasn't just a calling, it was a sign. A new life awaited him, a life that even he didn't know how much he needed. A few days after Charles's dream, things began to change radically. Not only in his life, but in Jade's life as well. Cancer treatment continued, but surprisingly, her body was responding much better than anyone had expected. The doctor who was watching her raised his eyebrows more and more at the rapid and unexpected progress of her health. One cool morning, while Jade was resting after an ozone therapy session, the doctor came to talk to Charles, who had never left her side. Looking at her with his tired but hopeful eyes, Charles felt an uneasiness in his stomach. He could see how Jade was struggling, but now, somehow, she seemed different. Not only was she stronger, but she was also brighter. The air around her seemed more alive, and even her eyes seemed brighter. The doctor, a middle-aged man with glasses, rubbed his forehead and looked at Jade's files, then looked up at Charles with a slight unease. Charles, I have to tell you something, he said in a slightly surprised voice. Jade's situation it's much better than I anticipated. In fact, it's much better than it should have been, considering the advanced stage of the disease. The tumor has shrunk considerably. This is amazing progress. Charles frowned and leaned forward a little, trying to understand. Although he was no medical expert, he knew that Jade's chances were extremely small, considering the stage 4 diagnosis. How is this possible? How can this happen? He wondered with a rushing anxiety in his voice. The doctor shrugged, somewhat puzzled, but with a trace of hope in his voice. I can't explain scientifically what's happening. I've seen cases where patients have responded in unexpected ways to treatments. But, in Jade's case, this progress is truly unusual. Usually at this stage, patients' lives are much more fragile and progress is slow, but in her case, everything evolved much faster. Charles remained silent, his eyes lost, thinking about the doctor's words. His entire world was shaking, as if everything he knew until then about life and death had been called into question. Although he couldn't fully understand it, a thought crossed his mind, almost like a revelation. Perhaps the change he was experiencing, starting with that dream of the angel and his desire to give up his life as an underworld, had something to do with what was happening now. Perhaps their love, his love for Jade, could truly overcome all obstacles. The doctor continued to speak, but Charles could hardly hear him, lost in his thoughts. If this progress continues, maybe she'll be able to cope with the treatments more easily and, one day, live without this burden, the doctor concluded. Charles felt his heart beat faster. A ray of hope penetrated his walls of uncertainty. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe, in fact, everything was about to change. A few days later, Jade was more active than ever. Not only did she feel better, but her morale had also risen considerably. That morning, even though the treatments had exhausted her, she had begun to eat more and talk about the future. She told herself that she no longer wanted to be defined only by her illness, but by what she could be in the face of. This miraculous change, she realized that she had never been closer to her true self. Charles, I feel better. Seriously, I feel better than I've ever felt. Maybe there's still a chance for me. Charles looked at her silently, his eyes moist with emotion. After reaching deep into his soul and promising to change everything for her, now that he saw her more alive than ever, he felt like all his sacrifices had been worth it. And you know what, Jade? I know you feel better because the love we have for each other makes us strong. Maybe it's not just the treatment that makes you feel that way. Maybe change in our lives has a power that helps us face even the greatest challenges. Jade smiled, and her eyes took on a special brightness, as if a burning flame of hope was stirring from deep within her. Maybe you're right, Charles. Maybe love really is a force greater than anything. How much you've changed, not just for me, but for you too. Maybe this journey we're on together isn't just about illness, it's about life. About what it really means to live. Charles kissed her on the forehead, and in that moment, he felt happier than any other day in his life. In the midst of darkness, they had found the light. Maybe their life had many obstacles, but they were together. And in that love, they had everything they needed to face anything. A new beginning was visible on the horizon, and even if the road wouldn't be easy now, for the first time, they felt that they weren't alone. And the change that was taking place in their lives, especially in Jade's life, was more than a miracle. He was proof that love, true love, can face any illness, any fear, any barrier. Chapter 5. The Beginning of Change. Charles stood in front of a large full-length mirror in his office at the restaurant. Looking at himself, his face looked more tired than he wanted to admit. It was as if every scar on his face, every wrinkle, told the story of the life he had lived so far. A life of chaos, of wrong decisions, of conflict and silent war with himself. But that morning, something inside him had changed. He didn't want to be that man anymore. He had seen too much darkness around him and too much suffering in the eyes of the people who had passed through his life. And now, at the end of the road, faced with a love that had transformed him more than anything else, he knew he had to make a decision. If he wanted Jade to live, if he wanted to save her, then he had to give up everything he had been. That meant giving up dirty money, influence and power to the whole life he had thought defined him. One day, when Jade was resting after a new chemotherapy treatment, Charles picked up his phone and, with a deep breath, dialed the number of a former friend, but also a trusted person from his past. Raymond. He was a man who had met Charles during the darkest times of his life, a man who knew all too well what the underworld meant. However, Raymond had always been there for Charles, even when he didn't deserve it. Now, however, Charles needed his help to leave his past behind. The phone rang for a few seconds before being picked up. Raymond, Charles said in his deep but sure voice, I need your help. I have to end everything. I want to give up everything. The business, that money, everything I built. I want to leave. I want to change. Raymond remained silent for a few moments, as if Charles's words had given him a little headache. Charles knew that it would not be easy to convince him, but he was ready to do anything. You have made a big decision, Charles, Raymond said finally, his voice sounding cold, but with a shadow of concern. You know what you are exposing yourself to. Every step you take in this direction can cost you. And I'm not just talking about money, I'm talking about your life. About what you have built, about what you have lost. Are you sure you want this? Charles closed his eyes and let a tear fall down his cheek, but he smiled to himself. It was a beginning, a hard beginning, but true. I'm sure. Jade deserves it all. She deserves to be a better person. And yes, I deserve to be better. If I have to lose everything, I'll lose. But I can't live with this demon inside me anymore. I can't live without giving something back. Raymond sighed. I understand. But you have to know what this entails. It won't be easy, and you don't know how those around you will treat you. Those who supported you and those who won't let you leave this world. There will be war, Charles. I'm ready, I promised. I'll do whatever it takes to quit. I want to start from scratch. I'd like to help you clean up your business and take everything that belongs to you. But I can't go back. Raymond fell silent again. Charles knew his friend had many doubts, but deep down in his soul, Charles felt that this was the path he had to follow. Okay, Raymond finally said, in a deep voice, if you want to quit, I'll help you. But be careful who you surround yourself with now. Because the moment you leave this world, you won't be protected anymore. You won't be anyone anymore. I know, Charles replied, but I chose to be someone, and someone better. I'm going to give up everything. Thank you, Raymond. I appreciate your help. After hanging up the phone, Charles felt lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Although the road ahead was difficult, he felt he now had a plan. He no longer wanted to be the man the world knew, the man who controlled and did harm. In the following days, Charles began to sell the business he had built with so much effort. He divided the money between various charities, leaving nothing for himself. He severed ties with those who had supported him in the past, sending them clear messages. It was time to leave. It was time to live a clean life, without blood on his hands. And the same days, he met with lawyers and advisors to close his businesses and protect himself from any possible legal repercussions. Giving up his dirty fortune was not easy. He was dealing with people who were not willing to let him go, but Charles was not afraid. Now, they had to meet the real Charles, a man who only wanted to save a life. At the same time, Jade continued her fight for life. Charles was by her side, but every time he looked at her, he realized that not only her health depended on their will to fight, it also depended on his choice. It was time to leave everything he knew behind and embrace an unknown future. And even if that future was not guaranteed, Charles knew that he wanted to live it with Jade. And that, at that moment, that mattered more than anything else. Charles stood in front of a closed ironwork, key still in hand, looking empty towards the shelves full of files and documents that contained everything that had meant his life up to now. It seemed that he had just given a final examination of his own existence, because every paper, every signature that he had left in his past, was a millstone tied to his neck now. However, there was no room for regrets. He had left everything behind. The business with the money boys, the relationships with dubious individuals, the underworld that had seized him and which, at first, seemed to make him invincible. Now, however, everything was falling apart before his eyes. He felt like a new person, but it was not at all easy to erase the traces of the past. The phone vibrated in his pocket. Charles took it out and looked at the number that appeared on the screen. Raymond. He wiped away a discreet tear that had slipped down his cheek, and then answered. Charles, Raymond's deep voice said on the other end of the line, I've heard some rumors about you. Not very pleasant things. It seems you've started to show signs that you want to leave the business for good. Didn't I tell you it wouldn't be easy? Don't expect everyone to let you go like that, without making a last-ditch effort to bring you back. Charles swallowed hard, feeling a pressure settle on his chest. I know what you mean. I know it's not easy, but I've made my decision. I don't need any of them anymore. I just want to be with Jade. I want to be a better man. Raymond was silent for a moment, as if Charles's words had surprised him. It was hard to believe that the man who had risen on the back of violence and dirty money could radically change his life. Are you sure you know what you're exposing yourself to? That it's not just about business, but also about who the people are behind you. If you feel like a child now, be careful, because the world will not be as kind to you, Charles. Charles felt every word Raymond said hit him, but he knew he was right. Every move he made now was an enormous risk. Not only was he giving up money and power, but also the protection that his underworld connections offered. He knew he had begun to make enemies and that these were not people to be left behind. I don't want to be protected anymore, Raymond. I want to be me, without fear. I will manage. Raymond remained silent, and for a moment, silence fell between the two men. And that silence, Charles understood that his life was heading in a direction that even he could no longer fully foresee. But now, he felt that he could no longer turn back. In the days that followed, Charles's life became more and more complicated. Although he had begun to clean up his business, problems were not long in appearing. The underworld did not forgive his betrayal. Every corner of the city seemed to whisper threats to him from the shadows. His every move was observed with suspicious eyes. But despite all these obstacles, he did not turn back. Jade, although still fighting the disease, noticed a profound change in Charles. She knew that it was not easy for him, but she saw in his eyes a determination that she could not. He had seen her before. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was truly protecting himself for the first time. One day, when Charles returned home to find Jade preparing a meal for them, he felt her hand shaking, but not because of illness. It was a tremor of love and the desire to live. In that moment, Charles understood that love for her had been the reason that had changed him and that would keep him on the right path. I love you, Jade. And I'm ready to do anything for you, even if it means losing everything I've ever had. Jade looked at him, her eyes wet with tears, but a shy smile lit up her face.